All right. Hello, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I am your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, and joining me today is Dr. Matthew Mancuso. He is a doctor of chiropractic in a place near, you may have heard of it. I believe it's called Ohio. It's allegedly a state within the United States, near Columbus, more specifically. And he is very well known in his particular field of chiropractic. He routinely travels the world teaching people, as he has said, to adjust not just bones, but also brains, which I think is very important because having visited chiropractors before who only work on, let's say, just the bones or what have you, it isn't enough. And a lot of times people need a lot more. And because everything starts and ends in the brain, it's very, very important to make sure that that is a consideration. And as it would turn out, not only is he a healthcare provider, but he is a lifter of iron, meaning he is a fan of kettlebells, calisthenics. He's done a number of my programs before, and he has reaped the rewards. And I wanted to have him on because he has made some really incredible gains over the last year or so that he's been training using a variety of my different programs and things of that nature. And it's always good to have somebody who is a pro at what he does be on the show to talk about things from a different perspective, because I can talk about things from the meathead perspective. But if somebody can put a little bit of science behind it, I think it make a lot more sense. We're going to kick things off in earnest in just a moment. But I would be remiss if I did not mention that if you do not yet have my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge, you're doing yourself a disservice. Maybe Matthew can. Yes, he's nodding his head. Yes, he says yes. That's very much the case. It is, in case you don't know, what's that?
You should do the thing.
You should do the thing. And the thing in this case is getting yourself a copy. Now, it is a digital copy. So that means you can get it very quickly. You can read it very quickly. And more importantly, you can learn the moves very quickly because it's not based on anything complicated. It's based on our gait pattern or our walking pattern, and specifically using movements like crawling, loaded carries, other type of strength movements that you can learn in under a minute, no exaggeration, and you can include in whatever your current training is. So it's designed to be kind of a bookend to whatever else you're doing. So you either do it before or after your training, and you simply reap the rewards. I've gotten a lot of very nice compliments about it. I know Matthew has done it, and he's enjoyed it. And I would highly recommend that you do precisely the same thing. So go to 9minutechallenge.com and get your own free copy. And that is the number 9minutechallenge.com. Final thing before we officially kick things off, there may be some grown-up language. So if you have kids in tow, I would put this in your naughty file, because there may or may not be some naughty language, and that might, I don't know. I don't want to corrupt your children's ears, but I'm guessing yours are already corrupted. So it's not really going to matter if you listen later, but kids want to hold that off as long as you can. So without further ado, Matthew, thank you for joining me.
It is a joy to be here with you, Alex. And I wish that I could remember the polysyllabic profanity that I learned when I lived in Ireland, because they make swearing into a poetry.
Yes, it's an art. And I've found too that particularly people in, we'll just say, other English speaking countries have certain swear words that even Americans are a little bit bashful to use. The Irish, the English, the Aussies, the Scots in particular, I am told. Yes, they've elevated it to an art form. Americans, I wouldn't say that we don't do a very good job at it, but I'm just saying is that there's they definitely have, they've figured out a way to level up that we are still reticent to do. Yes, absolutely. So if you decide to
so much from each other.
What's that?
We can learn so much from each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, we can teach them how to go to the moon, and they can teach us how to swear. If there's anything that we have proven that we can do, at the very least, it's that. And incidentally, I like to make that joke too, because, Europeans always like to poke fun at Americans. And, this is a very frequent thing that you'll see. People will be like, you'll see a news article, and it's like, a crater the size of 7 washing machines opened up in the middle of this highway, and people will be like, Americans will use anything but the metric system. And so I like to jokingly point out, well, there are two kinds of people. There's the people who have been to the moon, and then the people who use the metric system. And some Europeans find it funny, many do not. But at any rate, it's a good PG joke that I like to toss out periodically. So now I'm very curious, because I know paltry little about your background, apart from the fact that you are a professional chiropractor, owner of a clinic, a trotter of the globe. How did you get into fitness in general? And was it something that happened before you got interested in healthcare, or was healthcare first and then fitness kind of tagged along later?
Oh, fitness definitely came first. I remember I was in high school, and up to this point, I had spent, the whole old ads of the 90-pound weakling getting sand kicked in his face at the beach.
Yeah, Charles Atlas.
I lived that archetype of that scrawny little dorky weakling, and I just thought, well, this is the way. This is how it shall be. I hope Disney doesn't actually sue you for me using that little line of theirs right there.
I think you have to use 17 seconds or more of some kind of, yeah, you're fine.
We're good then.
Yeah.
So yeah, we end up being in high school. I believe it's sophomore year, and we finally have this gym class that, I'm used to just being the last in the mile, the last chosen for the kickball, the last chosen at all of it. I distinctly had loathed all of the different forms of sports at that point because I sucked at all of them. Profoundly. It was a gift. I was not the alpha, I was the omega. And then the gym class begins, and they walk us into this room that has these bars and plates and heavy things. And something in my little brain just went click, what this? And I started playing with said things and discovered very quickly my body went from, shall we say, the 98-pound weakling, could be blown away by a little, a gust from a hurricane because I grew up in Florida, and started actually developing muscle. Like my body changed. I'm like, this is so cool. And so just from that pure, weird little teenage ego brain alone, I was like, I must play with heavy things for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. Now, I had absolutely no idea what to do with them properly. So, I did the classic thing, which was just mess around with the things that I saw and made fun movements with my biceps with them. And it went that way for a while, but at least it still had planted the seed of, I like the heavy stuff.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because in high school, I had a similar experience, except for I didn't have a similar response in that I was interested in exercise, I think even before high school. But I remember in weight training class, because I sucked at every sport as well. I was picked usually not last, but it was like pretty close to last. It was like third or fourth to last for team sports. I just didn't really excel at anything super athletic. But I remember I especially did not excel at lifting weights. And I remember being buried on a bench press of what could not have been a lot of weight. I don't remember what was on the bar, but it was not enough for my spotter to have thought that maybe I would need to be spotted. And I wish I would have gotten that bitten by the iron bug that much earlier, because that would have put me several years ahead of the game. So at the very least, you decided, okay, so I like lifting heavy stuff. I like, I like the way that it feels. When did you start looking at, let's say, like magazines or videos or things like that to get even further instruction toward that end?
Oh, and that is where my initial impulse of like, ooh, I like this, really should have been followed through on with a little more diligence. Because when did I start actually following through in more depth? Oh, in my mid-30s.
Yeah. So this is probably a good 15 years have gone by.
Oh yeah. I had been just like, I had been playing with it, and it was I felt good in my body doing it. And it was, let's just say, there was a lot of other stress and chaos in my life. And so the gym was the one place I felt good. Mm-hmm. Like it was a form of therapy for me.
Yeah.
And so I really loved that about it. But it wasn't until I was actually practicing as a chiropractor, and, when I was in Seattle, Washington at that point, that I realized I should probably learn a little more about this. And that just came because of the introduction of a person in my practice who was studying for his RKC2. Now, for those who, don't know, the RKC, the Russian Kettlebell Challenge, I'm sure you could say more about that.
Yeah.
But, this guy, Ross, he was in the practice. He was a avid in all this stuff, loved it. And, we struck up an arrangement like, okay, we'll do a trade. I'll take care of you and you're going to train me.
Nice.
And his passion for the cannonball on a handle was so infectious that it made me want to learn everything I could about it. Because, he told me all the things that were possible with it. And I didn't quite get that out of the gates, but the idea of it and the passion he had for it, the excitement he had for it, I'm like, all right, I got to see what's up with this stuff. And that's what opened the door to me going, okay, let's dive down the rabbit hole and see what more is available. And from that, discovering people like Jeff Newport, and then from Jeff, discovering people like Alex Selkin and Pat Flynn. And so, yeah, thank you to Ross.
Big time. What's his last name? Let's
Ross
give him a
Meyer.
full Ross Meyer.
Really was.
And now what is he? We'll give him a further shout out. Does he have like any Facebook or anything like that? Or
He has avoided Facebook like the plague for about
smart
6 years now. So I would love to give him a real shout out. And I'm
yeah.
not sure how to actually contact him anymore.
Well, if you're in the Seattle area and you run across a man named Ross Meyer who happens to have an infectious love of kettlebells, then you will know at a minimum from this podcast that Matt Mancuso says many thanks. And I do think that that's a very important element in getting interested in any kind. Well, really, I would say anything in general, but for training in particular, my experience, I don't know if you have noticed this at all, but I think everybody to some degree has some kind of enthusiasm for exercise. And it's very strange because I never really realized it until I was living abroad. When I lived in Israel, I used to hitchhike, and I don't recommend people do that. You have to kind of know what you're doing to make sure you don't end up in a sort of sticky situation. But people would ask as I was hitchhiking, so, what are you doing in such and such place? And I'd say, oh, I was seeing a client. And they'd be like, well, what do you do? I'm a personal trainer. And then they would just open up like crazy, just love to talk about exercise. And I think what's very important is that nobody really knows what to do. Everybody knows, okay, I've got a trunk, I've got legs, I've got arms, I've got all this other stuff, but there's so much stuff to do. Where do I start? So having that kind of an enthusiasm for something specific that actually connects with people is important. And, my experience too was that I had a very similar experience because I had a friend who was got really into kettlebells just from reading Pavel's book, Enter the Kettlebell. And he was super excited about it and eventually called me over to his house to try a workout. And, history was made. Now, I'm guessing that because you had this connection with Ross and he was teaching you, and he was already an instructor, because if you're going through level 2, you have to have gone through level 1 to begin with. So he had some skills to teach. What was your experience? Like, what were you thinking when you started swinging kettlebells? Was it like, well, I didn't even want to put words in your mouth. I'm just very curious, like, what was that first response like once you actually started lifting them?
The first response was, this is not like the others.
Yeah.
This was a different experience than your like Valley Total Fitness where I'd been going at the time, and just like I'm on all the weird machines or even the free weights. I'm like, this was dynamic. This was like both a thing to be feared and also respected and also fascinated by. It was like an amazing woman. I'm like, this woman could kill me. I love her.
Yes.
Because this dynamic, like, you are juggling cannonballs. I mean, there's something magic to that.
That was how I felt too, because I had been doing pretty standard bodybuilding routine. And I was training at a martial arts gym at the time. And, it was like bicep curl. And it was stuff that I'd learned from a friend who I started going to the gym with. It wasn't actually what they were teaching there, but they had, free weights, and I would do that. It was like barbells, not so much barbell stuff, but a lot of dumbbell stuff. And then it was exactly that. It was upon seeing and trying out the kettlebell swing. It's like, I couldn't even really verbalize what was so great about it, but it was just like, to me, it felt like this is what training is supposed to feel like. It's like you're moving fast, you're lifting a weight with some speed and some authority. And it really filled in a pretty impressive gap. Now, because you'd already had a good amount of time as somebody who had tossed the iron around and, done plenty of, we'll say, basic kind of bro lifting, I would assume, what?
Well, it was mostly the machine lifting. It was the sad kind of lifting. It wasn't like the fun barbell, which makes me sad.
Yes,
well, but that earlier, who knows?
But I'll tell you this much, actually. I think machines do have a place, but the big problem with them for most people is they're extremely inconvenient. So it's like the minute you don't have access to the machine, or you're at a gym that doesn't have that precise machine, you're like, all right, well, what's the point? Everything's completely different. I think what's great about kettlebells and calisthenics by extension is that it teaches you to think principally in terms of movement as opposed to muscles, and even more so externalizing it and thinking only about machines.
Yeah, that's a really smart thing. And that is one of the bits. I love how, was it Pavel who was talking about how the kettlebell democratized real fitness? Like, because it's an eminently portable tool.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, compared to, shall we say, a Nautilus and that. I mean, of course, your own body in calisthenics is even more portable, because it's very hard to bring a 24-kilogram kettlebell on a plane, let alone a pair of doubles.
I had a situation recently, actually, as of the time of this recording anyway, my rabbi sent me a message, and he evidently started training with kettlebells. And I was like, I don't know why you didn't consult me earlier. I mean, I'm very happy that he did, but it's like, but yeah, he said, have you ever tried to travel with a kettlebell? And I was like, I was like, I don't recommend it. What would be better is if whenever you get to your destination, you try to find somebody that you can borrow a kettlebell from. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That is one tough part. But the nice thing, at least now, is that, when I got started, it was like kettlebell, like nobody knew what a kettlebell was. They'd never even seen one. Trying to describe one was like trying to describe, I don't know, anything nobody had ever seen and couldn't conceptualize. Nowadays, it's a little bit different. So by all means, folks, when you travel, don't try to bring a kettlebell with you. Now, when you were getting
fun fact, Marriott properties often have some kettlebells on premises these days, especially the Westins.
Very nice. Very nice. I was at a hotel in New York not terribly long ago. They had no kettlebells. So I made do with, some dumbbells. I didn't do swings or anything like that, but you gotta, in a pinch, you gotta be able to be adaptable. But it's good to hear that they're starting to get more kettlebells in, and you're seeing them more mainstream, because it really is an excellent tool. And if you're traveling and you have no other access to it, I mean, heck, I'll probably start staying at Marriott's now, knowing that I can get access to some kettlebells. Did he write you a program, or did he just put you on one that was pre-existing?
He wrote me a program, and that was part of what really, I think, helped, because as much as I'd been playing with the other things before, there were so many interesting asymmetries and underlying idiosyncrasies to my body that it was really helpful to have someone who actually was there with me, and then noticing each of the different pieces and tailoring it to me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something wonderful about having access to all these off-the-shelf things, but there's an even greater power to someone who can actually take a moment to be with you and see how your body actually works, to see, here's a good starting point. Let's fill in these bits before you try to take, I don't know, two beasts and shove them overhead. What do you say?
Yes. I would say also it's very good to hear that coming from, I mean, this is something you would expect, but hearing it come from a healthcare professional like a chiropractor, very important. Chiropractors, I think, seem to be very on point with that sort of thing on average, because my experience with them has been that they tend to be more focused on what are healthy actions that you can take outside my office so that you're not here as often. Or if you are here, you don't have to, we don't need several sessions to fix whatever is wrong. Whereas, for instance, it's really not in the training of doctors. I would say physical therapists, it should be, but I think most of them aren't lifting. Most of them are interested in endurance sports. And so they just don't have any real understanding of it. But that is an important thing to point out, is the asymmetries and the imbalances, because it is so common for people who have a recreational fitness background to have these. It's common for people who don't have a recreational fitness background to have these. And so if you're just jumping in wherever seems cool, you just got to hope that you're not jumping into some place you're going to get hurt,
Exactly. And I'm so often as well, even when people do finally start thinking, oh, I should probably do something about that, we tend to forget the area that when you step on a dog's tail, the other end barks. And so people will get something in their shoulder, and so they'll obsess on all these things to stretch their shoulder, strengthen their shoulder, all these bits. Dude, if there's something off kilter with your pelvis, your diaphragm, all these other layers, it'll show up there. So having someone who can actually take a comprehensive look at the function, not just follow the feeling, not just follow the symptom, but look at the actual function of the human body, and then supporting training that actually supporting the proper function of a body so that you can do what you want to do, move how you want to move, live how you want to live at the best level that you can.
Exactly. Everything touches. It's not like there's anything that's, it's like, okay, we call them isolation exercises. And I have no problem using the term, because everybody knows what it means. So periodically you get people who try to do the George Carlin, semantics game sort of a thing when you talk about stuff. But it's like, everybody knows what you mean. Okay. I get it that your wrist is also bending when you're doing a curl. It's an isolation drill anyway. It doesn't matter. But there is something I think that's very important for people to understand. It's that there's a time and a place for a lot of things. And over the long haul, the thing is, you don't have to do everything at once, but over the long haul, it's probably going to be helpful to at least put some kind of focus on certain things, keeping in mind the stuff that actually interests you. For me, I'm mostly interested in strength, and I do, endurance or zone 2 type cardio stuff because I know it's good for me. And so it's like broccoli. I'm learning how to enjoy it, but given a chance, if I had the opportunity, if I could take a pill and get zone 2 cardio benefits without actually doing it, I would probably do it. So learning how to love
If
it is,
that's the broccoli, how could you put cheese sauce on it?
there
Because
you
cheese
go.
makes everything better.
Well, I see, that's the thing is I like cheese. I would put it on stuff. I would eat dairy a lot more frequently, but my face, I always get like, even now as a mid 30s something, I get breakouts. And so I can't use that as an analogy, but I can understand where you're coming from. And I can appreciate the analogy.
I send you my thoughts and prayers.
Yes, well, I appreciate it. But given that you were just in France, we were talking about this before the chat.
Cheese.
Yes, cheese is, that's like, I would say France and Italy. There's probably like a head-to-head battle over who is more obsessed with cheese and who does it better. I can't really weigh in because I actually have never been to France, and I don't eat a lot of cheese. So I'm going to give it to France just off the top of my head. It just seems like, that's what they're known for. But going back to going from the topic of cheese into other things. Now, after having trained with the kettlebell for a good period of time, when did you start to say, okay, I want to start lifting heavier, I want to start going harder, I want to start learning more and more about the discipline, and I want to start learning about everything that is around it? Was this pretty quickly, or was this after maybe a good couple months, couple years of training?
It took a few years, because at that time in my life, while the kettlebell was a new, fascinating, shall we say, a love affair, the main thing I needed to actually focus on at that point was learning how the heck to run a practice.
Yeah.
You go to any professional school, they'll teach you amazing things to be an artist of your particular craft, but very little as to okay, now how do you go out and actually run a business of it?
Yeah.
And so that was more of the focus for a certain epoch of my life, we'll just say about 7 years.
Yeah.
And it was 2020. 2020 was what really deeply inspired me to shift into, okay, how could I actually take this to another level?
Certainly.
Because there was this sense of if everything literally fell apart and disappeared, what would I do with what I have? And since Rogue Fitness is based out of Columbus, Ohio, I was able to get kettlebells without delivery fees, which was great. And just decided, we're going hard in the yard. We're going to actually learn how to do this. And so starting off with like Pavel's good old Enter the Kettlebell, just rebooting through that, and then discovering some of Jeff's trainings on this like doubles complexes, and then realizing going into doubles complexes right after Enter the Kettlebell was maybe a few developmental steps too quickly.
There are a couple of steps in between. Yeah, certainly.
I'm filling in those gaps at the moment.
Oh, good. No, but I like the enthusiasm. And I also think that, you were able to find like your moment. You're like, you got to take action. It's imperfect action is better than perfect inaction. So you made the right step, I would say. And so you're doing Enter the Kettlebell, you're doing some of Jeff's programs. And at some point along the way, you're like, okay, this is exactly what I needed to be doing. This is a lot of fun. Have you integrated it at all with any of your students or any of your patients rather, so that you're like, you need to start lifting. I think you'll get a lot of benefit from this.
Yes. And actually that was more from meeting some of your material. Because I could see in your material more of like the functional easy movements that could meet people at any different level, whether they actually have had multiple of like crippling kinds of things happens, and how you can actually get them up and mobilizing and moving and actually engaging their body in more of a sense of confidence again, as well as like more of a middle step. Or if people don't want to go to kettlebells, and like your body weight mastery program, it has like built in there, it's almost idiot proofed as to how to discover what level for each exercise you're at. That was a really nice touch. As someone who likes to just go from 0 to, flying the moon, I'm like, oh, developmental range. Isn't that fun?
That's something that actually I learned. I think a lot of people don't learn this. A lot of my colleagues don't learn it because I think they're people who gravitate toward them naturally are people who maybe they've trained for a while and they're like, okay, I've done this for a bit, I want to try this. But when I was living abroad, I saw it a little bit when I was living in Omaha early on. And then when I started training people who were being sent to me by physical therapists, I was like, initially I told them at some point you're going to have to buy a kettlebell because we're going to do kettlebell training. And then I started training them and I was like, they are very far away from safely lifting a kettlebell. And it's not, and I wasn't being, I would say, overly cautious. It was like they had twisted pelvises or they had any other number of things where it's like, if I tried to get them to swing a kettlebell, it could be disastrous. So I was like, well, okay, so what can I do that's going to actually move them forward, actually help them? And then at some point, should kettlebells be a part of the picture? What's actually going to help make them able to lift the kettlebells? And so I had to kind of rewire the way that I thought about training so that it had more of these steps to it, because I do notice, and this isn't the criticism of my colleagues, but I noticed that this is a case with a lot of my colleagues, not because, they not because they're ignorant or whatever, but that's just the people that they serve generally don't necessarily need these steps. And I was finding, well, because I've served these people before, I would bet that there are a lot of people who want to be at this level and want to identify with this level, don't want to identify with anything that they would view as lower. So they need to be given permission to do these things in the pursuit of all these other things so that they can make a smooth move. They can make a smooth break for it, as opposed to a leap of faith, as it were.
That is very well said.
I couldn't have said it better myself if I had tried. However, I did try. I did say it. So I will absolutely take credit for that.
You did the
But
thing.
no, I'm very glad to see that you noticed it, because I try to do that with most of my programs, is give people things where it'll meet them where they are. And, if there's something that's just going to be beyond their abilities, like if it's a double kettlebell program and, they've never lifted a single kettlebell, like you have to do something different. There's just no, what I'm saying? Like, I can't really help you there. But yeah, I do think that's very important. And I've noticed that more people need that than don't.
Mm-hmm. It's a truth. I mean, most of us growing up in a very sedentary, seated, like sitting oriented culture, and not just sitting, but sitting with flexion, like with our whole body bent in a direction that we hopefully had evolved beyond that level, but it seems we're returning towards, and is like so gloriously detrimental to the human physiology, as well as our physicality, as well as our psychology. I mean, the shifts in attitude and like emotion that happen just from like flexed posture alone is devastating. And so in bodies that have been conditioned in this certain way, with them the cortisol levels of living in the constant chronic stress fire hose that is, enter the modern world, with a physiology that's designed to respond to the emotional mental stress of social media and politics with the same level as it would a car crash. And then you're trying to take that kind of body and then put it out there and dive right off the deep end. Having done that enough times and having fucked myself up enough times, you gave a disclaimer, so I had to at least give you.
Yeah, of course. You have to use at least one, exactly.
Having gloriously fucked myself up by doing that enough times, there is something very, very, very important to be said on how the beginning steps are not remedial, how the fundamentals aren't basic. Basic. But there's a developmental path for each aspect of us. And some parts of us are further along and some parts are at an earlier place. And how do we best tailor things where that person is so they can go above and beyond to the level that they dream of?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. I think a big thing too is that I'm always careful about the verbiage that I use. Like I never say basic, because people are like, I don't need basic. I never even say fundamental, because what I want people to understand is that these are movements that, and these are things, like I'll usually say foundational or essential. And, people, these are things people can I think relate to these things better. And then the other thing too is that if you zoom in on doing things in a way that people had never done them before, it gives honor to whatever it is. Like let's take the push-up, for instance. So the way that I teach people to push up, I think is far more advantageous than the way they typically learn it, which is, they're kind of making the shape of it. It's like, all right, I bend my elbows, my chest gets closer to the ground, and then I come back up. What's the big deal? And like
it seems simple.
Exactly. And, to be frank, it is simple. But the thing is that there are ways that you can make it more effective, specifically because, many people will be like, man, I would love to do a one-arm push-up one day. I don't know if I could ever do it, but I would love to. So I'm like, okay, well, why don't we take a look at your regular push-up and see if we can set it up in a way that'll better prepare you for it if you ever decide to get there. So once they start doing push-ups in that different way and they find it to be more challenging, but also more productive, chest is getting bigger, it's getting stronger, their arms are getting bigger, what have you, then they can start to see, again, they're like going from one step to the next. And they say, you know what, maybe I could do push-ups with my feet elevated. Maybe I could do a push-up with my hand elevated. I'm just doing it on one hand. And so with each step, they can start to see a little bit further. They can't necessarily see the finish line, but they can see that there is another stage that they could get to. And I think the key is that, I mean, really the only way that that's even possible is they have to be good at foundational things. And the only way that they're going to get good at it is if they want to do it. You know, like I know that you talked about the need to actually run a successful practice. And this is a big thing in sales, is that you can't sell anybody anything that they don't want. There's this concept
Bingo.
that, yeah, people think, oh yeah, I don't trust salesmen because they try to sell me stuff that I don't want, or what. It's like, no, you're never going to buy anything that you don't want. Now, you might buy something you don't need. That's a different story. You might have a sleazy salesman who lies to you to get you to buy something that is unnecessary or that won't work. But the only way that you're going to buy it is if you actually want it. And so, my take on getting people to fall in love with the stuff that they would normally think, their ego would tell them, I'm too good for this, or I don't need this. This is, whatever, is I try to connect it with something that will allow them to see the value of being able to do it, and how there actually is a level of challenge in there that's going to meet their goal of their ego to feel like they're overcoming something. And ego, I don't think, is a bad thing, incidentally. I'm sure you agree with me on this. We have an ego for a reason, It's like we have 10 toes for a reason.
The ego should be congruent with the level of of the gift that you can offer to others. If your
Certainly.
ego is bigger than, you got to have a big enough ego to manage the stress of the world.
Yeah.
But one that's also then equivalent to the kind of value and the presence you bring to the world.
Totally. Absolutely. And the other thing too, is I think a lot of people are afraid of, they're afraid of using the term, but everybody has one. So it's like, it's better to appeal to it, but in a way that's actually going to be beneficial to you than to just, pretend like, oh no, we've sublimated our egos. We don't need this stuff. It's not the case. It's not at all. But I'm with you. And I think
yet at the point where I can create a kettlebell with my mind.
You'll get there.
Good.
You know what? There's a funny picture. I'll have to see if I can track it down. My mentor, Scott Stevens, who taught me the kettlebell kung fu way back in the day. Of him, it's like a kettlebell that he snatched and let go of. It's like, you would let it go and then you catch it in midair. And so it's like, kind of like juggling. And so you see it, there's like this kettlebell just floating there. And he said something like the mind snatch or something like that. I don't remember. He had a really funny quotation on it, but it's cool. It doesn't look, I mean, to the trained eye, you can see that's obviously what he did, but to the untrained eye, it's just like, how did he even make this happen? So one day we'll get a video of it, and it will be, the whole thing will be done, just with the mind, not with the body. Hey, you may be the first one to do it. I don't know that Scott's really training for that just now, but
I see myself having another concussion trying. So no, we're good.
Very possible. That's the other thing, is you got to be outdoors at a minimum. Go hard in the yard, but don't try this indoors. Now you did mention in roughly in 2020, when you started to expand your horizons and look for new sources of information, that eventually you came across me. And I'm curious, because I'm always curious about how people find me, because I never know. It's like I put stuff out into the ether. It's like NASA sent out satellites with like information about humans and whatever. It's like I never know which one actually landed and where. So I'm curious, how did you hear about me for the first time?
I am wondering if the reason we haven't heard from extraterrestrial life is that NASA sent out all of our nudes and no one's interested.
Yeah, they're like, we'll pass. they put the most unattractive, drawings of people.
Yeah, but to answer the actual question, it was from an email from Jeff, and he was sharing about your Dawn of the Dead bug.
Oh, nice.
He was like, dude, this Alex guy, awesome stuff, and this dead bugs are so vital, and it's like, this is going to be a program that's going to help you really get a sense of that on a whole other level. And that basically was like a watershed moment for me on a few levels. It wasn't the program itself. It was the simple fact that you had the audacity to call it Dawn of the Dead bug. And as one absolute dork to another, I adored that.
Yes.
And then on top of it, you call yourself, Alex, the Hebrew hammer, Salkin. And I'm like, this guy's got chutzpah.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to see what he's up to. Let's check this out. I
like to hear that. I remember Jeff too. I think he mentioned in one of the emails, he said that it was kind of a funny name, but it was a serious program or something to that effect. And to me, it's always just I always just thought people should have, it should give people like a grandiose vision when they read what it's called. and so I remember I've had a couple other ones that were, I would say kind of like nice plays on words, but I think Dawn of the Dead Bug was the first one that really I felt like this really gives people a vision of what I'm trying to achieve. Like, make this epic, make it fun, make it like, the sort of a thing that you automatically like magnetically attracted to. So no, that's very cool. I like hearing that. That's cool indeed.
Well done, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate the golf clap. I've earned it. I'm letting my ego say that. I've certainly earned that golf clap. Now I know at some point along the way, because I think I remember the first email that you ever sent to me, at any case, was pertaining to kettlebell mastery. I think you had a question about it, and so you went through kettlebell mastery. You had
about the impossible snatch. Yeah, going from the high, it was about the high pull then press. I'm like, so am I supposed to high pull and immediately press? And I think along the lines of, do you want to keep your shoulder attached?
Exactly. Yeah. I think I was more pleasant than that, but that was the idea. Exactly. It was like, and I realized from that, I was like, man, I got to be a little bit more. I have to be a little bit clearer, because I don't like how many people never even asked, and they just was like, all right, well, I'll try it. It was like, no, make sure you do it clean.
No, I don't know everything, so I assume like, oh, he might know something I don't. This is novel. I should ask first, though.
Yes, I'm glad that you did, because every once in a while I'll get a question like that. I'm like, of course, like I know what's going on in my head, and I just feel like I've expressed it well enough in a program. But sometimes there's something like ladders, for instance. I've included ladder format in a lot of different things, and I forget that for some people they may not have seen it in other things, or this may be their first contact with it. So it would make sense to just be like, here's what a ladder is, and here's how it works. And so, at some point I'm going to have to go back through a lot of these things and be like, this is a ladder, here's how it works, et cetera, et cetera. These are other things that I often use. So yes, no, it's a very good thing and fortuitous that you elected to reach out and just double check. But as I recall, you had some very good results with kettlebell mastery.
I loved that program on a lot of levels, and one of them being, the theme's been progression. We've been talking about the developmental progression, and how it really had all the different layers. I mean, from the optional 2-week on-ramp, which I went with just to build in the fundamental core bits, which also related to some of the pieces from your 9-minute, body weight and kettlebell thing. Do it. If you haven't already done it, do it. But to build that foundational resilience, and then the pieces that build on top of that, working through the course over 6 weeks. It was real. And with that, not just the kettlebell things, but also the integration of the foundational movement things, the OS things, the stretches, all the different things that were specific to each movement. And that to me was the moment of going, this dude knows what's up, because it's really specific. It was like surgical level, like, okay, you're doing these movements. Here's then you're doing this with a bell. So here's the kinds of movements you need to be able to do with it. And that was so freakishly supportive.
No, I'm very happy to hear that, because that was the whole idea that I had in mind. I wrote, for instance, I wrote Body Weight Mastery, something I'm going to be rewriting not terribly long from now. I'm going to distill it into something I think that has, I will say, fewer moving parts, but still every bit as functional, just because I have other things now that fill in the gaps, whereas that I was using it to like try to fill in every conceivable gap. But with Kettlebell Mastery, I was like, you know what? There's a similar issue that a lot of people have, which is there are things that would help them if they had done them before. So rather than just say, look, do all this stuff beforehand, I'm just going to make that like a part of the process. So that way, by the time they're going through everything, like they're able to not only, number one, get what they needed to begin with, but number two, they can see the connection between the things that they're trying to learn. Like, let's say hamstring curls with, goblet squats or something along those lines. So no, I'm very happy to hear that you actually could see like the logic behind it, because my fear was people are going to be like, well, there's just a bunch of stuff in here. I don't quite get this, but no, that was very cool. And then you did double kettlebell mastery, as I recall.
Well, then I attempted, because you didn't actually have a program for double at that point yet. You worked on that. Awesome. But you did have some really great training on the nuances and the movements and OS things that go with each of the double moves, which was amazing. And so I attempted to then just redo the kettlebell mastery, but with doubles, and discovered very quickly, there's a lot more going on when you do doubles.
Oh, yes. Yeah, when you have double kettlebells in particular, I think the main difference is actually a lot of it's technique because, for instance, if you're doing a single kettlebell overhead press, there's some degree of like lean to the side. That's just, that's physics. You got to blame Newton for that. It's not my fault. But you have a
Newton, that
different,
bastard.
I know. If only I could go back to the 1600s and, give them what for. But it's 100% the case when you talk about stuff like the military. I bring up the military press specifically because I think it's just a perfect example. The side lean is you've just got to make way for the movement of the bell. And when you've got two bells, there's some degree of lean, but it's in a different direction and it's backward. And so now if there are any mobility issues, you've got to consider the mobility issues from a completely different angle. So yeah, there's a lot going on. And then of course, the fact that you're doubling up on the amount of weight that you're using, that has an impact, as you noticed.
With momentum, double the weight with a lot of momentum.
Yes. Oh, yes. A ton of momentum. But as I recall, you went through it. I remember you were like, man, this was a hard workout. This is a hard week, but you crushed it.
It was a lot of fun. And I'm really grateful I did it. And then what I discovered then from that was, okay, I have to up my recovery game if I'm going to be doubling up with that kind of intensity.
Absolutely.
I think the next level that I'm looking at is how to really integrate places that are supporting the strength, the mobility, and also the recovery. So it's adding to my day.
Yeah, I will, as soon as this call is over, I will give you some pointers that I think you'll find helpful. And so for all the gentle listeners, you are going to be left in the dark. I'm sorry, but not sorry. And then finally, actually, this is another fun thing, is you were the winner of the consistency challenge.
Yay!
That's right. I remember watching, I was always watching people don't realize this, but I watch very closely what goes on in the group, and so when people are doing consistency challenge, I've got my eyes. I'm looking, I'm seeing what's going on. And I thought it was great watching the way that you intuitively figured out. So for instance, like with the Bulgarian deadlift, as I like to call it, or the split stance deadlift, when to move back a little bit and say, I'm going to use a more foundational progression, when to move forward a bit, when to ask, like, okay, am I doing this correctly? Can I make any tweaks to the, this, that, and the other thing? And you got some pretty epic results, as I recall.
That was fun. And there's really something great when you're actually not only on a program, but then you've just decided, okay, I'm going to post in this regularly to hold myself accountable. Yeah. Because one of the gifts of having access to all this information out there is that we can access all these great programs all the time. One of the challenges is that there's so many programs, as we were talking before, it's easy to squirrel. Yeah. And so some kind of accountability system really is amazing for getting your results out there. And so I had a lot of fun.
No, and I thought you did a great job. And I think I want to underline too that, one of the really important things is, and this is especially the case for me, because I will say I'm rather prolific when it comes to, putting out programs and coming up with, with things, because I've got all these ideas in my head, and I'm like, if I don't write them down, I don't, put them out into the universe, I'm not doing myself or anybody else any good service. But it is important, once you decide that you're going to go on a certain road, you're like, it's like, for instance, you wouldn't fly to France and be like, okay, I got to lay over here. Maybe I'll get on a different plane. We'll go to a different place. And then maybe when I decide to, we'll go back to France. It's like, you've chosen where you're going to go. There are a lot of other cool places to go to. You can consider that only once you've completed this trip. And I think that that's a good way for people to look at it, because I'm the same way. I see cool programs, or I see, cool new product, and I'm like, I got to get this. I got to sign up. I need to know. And there's certainly nothing wrong with it. But I think that and this is one of the things that I try to impress upon people. First, you want to just complete whatever it is that you're doing. Even if you get lackluster results, it's important to finish it, because it teaches you something that you're not going to get from even a good program, which is the value of sticking with things when they don't seem to be going right. When everything's going great, you don't need to worry about sticking with it. Like, you're automatically just, you're intuitively, you want to keep doing it. So, I think it's very, very important to be able to stick with things and then reassess when you're done, and then say, okay, now I'm going to move on to something different.
It's so much just like in my clinical practice, with people, like I'll do an examination in the beginning and put together a course of care based on what's going on with the state of their health, their nervous system, their brain.
Mhm.
And some people, they might get great results right away. And others, it really takes like up till the bitter end. And they're like, what's happening? What's happening? What's happening? And then boom. And it's like, there's something in like that grind on the plateau where you're actually doing, where the work's happening behind the scenes, you're doing the stuff, and you give it time to finally like take root.
Yeah. I'm glad that you said take root, because I heard very recently what I think is maybe the best analogy I've ever heard. It was from an email that Matt Fury sent out. And what he said, for those who are not familiar, Matt has been a guest on the show. He's the author of a number of books, probably the most famous of which is Combat Conditioning, which is, if you don't have it, is like a must. I have it on my bookshelf nearby. I can't pull it out right now, but it is. He's really the guy who like kickstarted the calisthenics revolution. He wrote this book in 98, 97 and 98, I think. And it was just like, I mean, it exploded. It got translated into a bunch of different languages. I remember Usher, the R&B star, was doing his workouts very famously, back in that time. And Matt put out an email where he said, people aren't really they're not very patient with themselves when it comes to their training. Like, but you have to look at it like you're planting a garden. You wouldn't go out, plant the seed, pour some water on it, and then stare at it and be like, well, nothing's growing. Like, you understand intrinsically that you need to show up, you need to water it, you need to keep a schedule, you need to stick to that schedule, and you're going to water it maybe every day for 30 days, whatever it may be, and nothing will happen. And then on day 31, I don't think he said it exactly like this, but this is the intent. Eventually, you start to see something sprout. And now all of a sudden the plant grows very, very quickly. So the big problem I think that a lot of people run across is that they're not as patient with themselves as they would be with a garden. But a garden is just a reflection of nature. And what are we other than similarly reflections of nature? So in order to conquer nature, you have to obey nature. And that requires some level of patience and willingness to just show up and just believe that the path that has been given to you is going to help you out. And I think that it's very similar in chiropractic care. It sounds like very similar, obviously, in strength training, is that you need to be patient. You're planting a garden. Got to keep it in mind.
We're both working with the same body, same nerve system. It has basic rules.
Yeah.
That's just how it works. Unfortunately, we didn't come out with an owner's manual, but Alex Selkin said it here, folks.
Yeah. But you know what? You'll be happy to hear this. I do have the plan at some point in the future to write a book called The Owner's Manual to the Human Body. And it will be focused around, we'll say some basic stuff in terms of strength, but also like, a variety of other health related things, and just be like, look, the details are going to change for everybody, but these are the non-negotiables. These are the things you have to do. And, so on and so forth. So look for that on bookshelves. I will say 2025. I have no idea. I don't really have any specific, a date by which I will have done it, but I will create the owner's manual to the human body, and I will be the official author. And then the best thing would be to make sure that it gets handed out at hospitals when a kid is born, be like, your kid's going to need this at some point. So hang on to this. You might as well start using it yourself.
Well, the key will be finding a translator for the first few chapters in baby.
Correct. Yeah. Goo Goo Gaga is not really going to go over very well. But you know what? Google probably has Google Translate for baby. It's got the word goo right in it. So goo goo got right. Did you?
I said I walked right into that one.
Yes, you did. You did. But at any rate, patent pending on that. So if anybody else thinks they're going to do it, no, you're not. I've already called it, and this podcast is proof. Okay, this is late July rather of 2023. I have a witness, so don't even try anything funny. Matthew will also double as my lawyer somehow, in case I need it.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly. Be very good luck. Well, before we go, I want to make sure that I give people an opportunity to, particularly in the Columbus, Ohio area, an opportunity to find you and find your practice and follow you. And because you mentioned in particular that you follow a particular brand of chiropractic. So if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about that, a little more about what you do in your clinic, and then how people can follow you if they so choose.
I mean, the simple difference of what we do compared to most other things, like there's two main branches within chiropractic, two main directions the profession goes. One is more focusing on like the relief of just like aches, pains, mobility, and that's beautiful and that's wonderful and it's highly recommended. My wing of the profession looks at that and goes, okay, cool, but what's the thing that's running the like all of those systems in the first place?
Yeah.
The freaking brain. I mean, bones are great, but can a bone move out on its own? No.
Not at
So
all.
my back went out or my disc slipped. Bones are dumb. They follow orders from something else. What moves your bones? Your muscles. Yay, muscles are great. Muscles are beautiful. So why is it hard to get off the couch and exercise? Because muscles are also kind of dumb. They don't run themselves. They follow orders from headquarters.
Yeah.
What's the thing that coordinates those? Your freaking brain. Now, 2% of that brain is logical and rational, and the other 98% is running everything behind the scenes subconsciously.
Yeah.
And is really impacted by all this thing called, stress, life, physical stress, chemical stress, like mental, emotional stress. You get hit by a car, you play football, or you eat Taco Bell. That'll do it. Or heck, you're on social media or you're on earth and politics and all that crazy crap. That brain is shaped by that, which then fires the body in different ways, which can create a lot of dysfunctional movement patterns, a lot of dysfunctional patterns in the inability to really develop in strength and mobility, as well as emotional mental stress. My dog is out there barking her head off because she's very excited about this conversation.
Yes. She's very stressed that she's not a part of this conversation.
Oh, yes, deeply. Actually, she's defending the domain against the dogs next door.
Good.
We are alive because of her. 6 pounds of power.
Yes.
But anyway, that's why we're more of a brain-based style of chiropractic. And so, I find it's really great for folks who've either tried the musculoskeletal things and they're like, well, I'm getting limited results. I've done it, but it keeps bouncing back. Mm-hmm. Or on the flip side, people who have had things like anxiety, depression, the chronic inflammation kinds of things. I know for myself, I ended up going into chiropractic because, in addition to, I loved the exercise, but it was my form of therapy. That's because I was navigating not only digestive disorders, it felt like the alien was bursting out of my stomach, ulcers, but also chronic migraines, also like asthma, also anxiety, also depression. And, I tried like every other thing under the sun, 6 ways to Tuesday to figure out what's up. I stumbled into a chiropractor's office and those things shift. Yeah. And like, how is chiropractic helping with this? Now I finally get how. Yeah. You actually have to use different approaches if you really want to affect the brain in a way that helps the body work at its best.
Absolutely. And I think that this is something that a lot of people don't think about because we're just so used to the fact that like, okay, yeah, we have a brain, we think, whatever. But, like there, you don't, it's like if you're, it's like the analogy of or the parable of the people facing a wall and they can only see the shadows cast upon it by the fire. If that's the only thing you've ever seen, like, it's just inconceivable that there would be any way to change such a, or that anything outside the situation exists. So I think a lot of people just think this is just my lot in life, like this is just the way that I think. They don't realize they have control over it.
And that's one of the biggest beliefs I look forward to actually eradicating from humanity. You'll write the owner's manual. If I can just eradicate that one belief of, well, that's as good as it gets, that's just how it is, I would be thrilled. Because, a great book once said, we do not see the world as it is, we see it as we are. We literally see the world through the lens of our nerve system. And if there's actually a dysfunction in that's happened from all just the accumulated, I've had 17 different head traumas in my life. That shit shook up my brain. Okay. Yeah. And that changed how my body worked. It changed how my digestion, changed a lot of different things, but it also can be improved. And knowing that same system, learns. That brain can learn, the body can learn anything that has happened. Like the game ain't over till you're dead. At that moment, okay, that's a whole other conversation. That's beyond my pay grade. Yeah. But until that moment, there is room to heal. There is room to grow. There's room to actually strive to even be better. And
absolutely.
So unleash that within you. That's my baby. That's why I get out of bed in the morning. And that's why I like to swing heavy things. So I actually have the resilience, the energy, and the strength to carry that in the world.
Definitely. And I think that there's no coincidence that you're working on the brain to improve the body, and similarly you're working on the body to improve the brain, because the easiest way, in my experience, to get to the mind is through the body. So the marriage, the iron and the mind, that's exactly what it's all about.
100%. I was actually a drug rehab counselor before I was a chiropractor, and that's where I discovered very quickly, you have very limited access to the mind from the mind. But when you work with the body, you can do amazing things to shift the mind. Absolutely. And likewise, that shift the mind, the body. So It's like they're connected somehow.
Who knew? Not me. I had no clue until this very conversation. I was completely walking around ignorant. But now you're in Worthington, Ohio. As I recall, you are Intrinsic Care Chiropractic. And what is your website so that anybody who feels so inclined can go check it out, maybe set up an appointment with you?
We are intrinsiccarecolumbus.com. Easy peasy. We're also on the Insta at Intrinsic Care Columbus and also on the Facebook at Intrinsic Care Columbus. If you find a Matthew Mancuso who has an absurd amounts of memes that he likes to share, that's probably me.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. He's in Columbus. He's a chiropractor. He shares memes. You really only need those three things and you will have found him, almost certainly. Well, Matthew, thank you very much for coming on the show. It has been a pleasure chatting.
It's been a joy, man.
And folks, as always, have fun and happy training.